Hello, hello! I am Ben Pick, and thank you for joining me in Running to Write, where I give questionable writing advice through running metaphors. Today I'm discussing how the Nevernight Chronicles could have been improved. Over the past 3 videos, I've highlighted the flaws across the series without running through the core of the issues due to spoilers. This video is under no such limitations, so there will be major spoilers ahead. It's going to be a long one too, though the techniques and recommendations I describe can be used by any writer as they're creating their own works. The 2 biggest problems I had with the series were the lackluster antagonists and the misguided misdirection attempts. There is a big asterisk here, as I'm not including in that list of 2 the worst plot point I have ever come across. I'll get into that one a little bit later on in this video, so for right now, these are the 2 big problems I had with the series, which weren't outright insulting to me. First of all, the big bad is not that bad. Sceva is the series' antagonist, yet it's not until the 3rd book that he does anything truly evil. Only after he gives in to his desire for power and absorbs the will of an angry dead god does he start killing people for no reason. Until then, he may have been a terrible leader, but for all the world building done, I didn't know for sure. There was even a perfect missed opportunity in the first novel when the assassins in training needed to obtain rumors as a part of a competition. We never found out what the winning rumor was, which felt like it was set up to be a revelation. I don't know if that was a dropped plot point, but it could have been the ideal moment to showcase Sceva as a monster. The pages were already included in the novel as Mia went into the city to obtain her own rumors. They could have instead been used for her to discover as much as she could about the people she intends to kill. Had any of the rumors involved how Sceva was destroying the city of Godsgrave, either through his actions or decisions, I would have understood much more of the buildup of him as the series' villain. Moreover, one of the rumors Mia obtained involved how Sceva's young son was given a position of leadership over a group of legionnaires. The person mentioning this rumor even went so far as to comment how young Sceva's son was, highlighting his age. If you didn't already assume that Mia's brother would be back based on the initial scene in which he was imprisoned, well, this one shined a neon light on the fact that Sceva had taken and adopted Mia's brother. This passing rumor should have triggered Mia. The fact that it doesn't made me question her deductive reasoning and her desire to kill Sceva. She should have wanted to spend every night in Godsgrave hunting for Sceva-specific rumors, as she learns as much as she possibly can about the man she intends to kill. Not doing that made me realize what a bad assassin she is, and by association, the weaknesses of those villains. The second novel made an attempt to drive home the theme that slavery is evil. Mia, as an entitled child, came to realize that her family had taken advantage of those less fortunate by owning slaves. The novel Godsgrave seemed poised to show that Sceva is evil by having him enact a new law to take away slaves' rights or make it more difficult for them to earn their freedom. Sceva was also cartoonishly too smart and knowledgeable. He knew people's locations and plans when there was no way that he could. In the 3rd novel, even Mia mentioned how it makes no sense that he was able to mobilize the army to enter an ancient ruined city from across the world. When Mia killed Sceva's body double, it was almost an accident that the real Sceva survived. In every other encounter though, he was able to foresee and plan for impossible scenarios. Giving Sceva superhuman brilliance and an unexplained all-seeing power didn't make him a more impressive villain. It was just another in the long list of ways that the series broke for me. In case you didn't watch my last video, this will be a controversial take, but Mia is more of a villain than Sceva. From a pure numbers standpoint, across the series, Mia killed far more innocent people than Sceva ever did. I said a lot more in my previous video, so check it out for a full explanation on the climax of the series and Mia's awful role during it. Shifting topics to the second big issue across the series, the misdirection failures applied the same trick repeatedly. Jay Kristoff, the series' author, changed points of view to try and build tension when there wasn't any. He even went so far as to change points of view mid-scene, which is one of my big pet peeves for novels. For example, in the second novel, we see a chapter from Magistrea's point of view as she happens to find Arcades finding evidence that the gladiator Furion was in bed with his owner Leona, who Arcades happened to love. Even before a betrayal and murder happened, the way that the scene was told revealed to me that Magistrea was the future traitor and murderer. This seems fine, except that both the story and Mia were surprised by Mag's betrayal. Were it not for a conversation Mia has with Sidonius about how virtuous Arcades is, she seemed content to assume that he is the traitor all along, even though that means that she let her guard down when there was still the obvious traitor of Mag running around. With this pattern established, anytime we switch away from Mia's point of view, it was obvious that we were only doing so to try and build up tension or throw in a red herring. At the end of the second novel, when we shift into Leona's point of view, which is something we had never done before for a full chapter, it was obvious that whatever Mia was doing was one giant deception. In this case, she was seemingly killing her gladiator friends, so I knew that they were all still alive. In the first novel, Nevernight, there was a similar moment meant to build up tension as the point of view shifts. Mia is finishing up a conversation and then leaves the hallway, where the point of view then shifts into Hush, where we see that he was listening in like a creeper. This felt like it was meant to make us potentially think that Hush was the one going around killing the would-be assassins. Thus, this end of chapter jump scare moment was meant to drive up tension and make it seem like Mia's life was in danger. It also was a mid-scene point of view switch, which is something I absolutely hate. There was another similar shift in Dark Dawn that only served to show that the new point of view character was about to die. I don't have good advice on how these scenes could have been written better, short of not including the point of view switches. For the gladiator fight, we could have stayed in Mia's head, where the emotions were running high and she was worried about deceiving the crowd and saving her own life and saving the lives of her friends, all while she needs to win the competition so that she can kill Skeva. Without the POV shifts, I would have at least considered Arcadius capable of betraying the gladiator group until the body count started rising. That would have been a more interesting novel to read. For the scene where we were in the POV of what's his name as he died, we could have instead overheard the commotion from Mia's point of view, as she is suddenly racked up in her worry and guilt. She would then fight the invading assassins recklessly, all to come to the bitter realization that her friends are already dead. Another misdirection failure was in the first novel within Mia's backstory. I already mentioned how Skeva had clearly adopted Mia's brother and that he was still alive. Yet within Mia's backstory, her mother's final words to Mia are a cryptic message about her brother's whereabouts, which felt like they were only included to deceive readers. Sure, Mia's mother is crazy from being imprisoned for so long, and yet she should have wanted to absolve her sins to Mia. Either have her mother speak entirely in insane terms, or have her not want to speak at all to Mia when she realizes that she's a darkened monster. The intentional misdirection served to highlight Mia's brother's actual whereabouts, which were in Skeva's care. And this is novels before Mia comes to the same realization. In another scene, there was an obvious misdirection which unraveled the novel's twist for me. After being intimate with Trick, Mia opens the door to find Ashlyn standing there, who now knows that Ashlyn and Trick are kind of together. Later on, evidence was planted in Mia's bed to make everyone think that she was the one who murdered the would-be assassins. This seems written to make us think that Trick was the one who planted evidence against Mia, except that Ashlyn was the obvious culprit due to her known stealth skills and Trick's lack of motives. With that logical step, I realized that Ashlyn was the one involved in killing the other would-be assassins. From there, it was easy to assume that Ashlyn and her brother were taking out the church from within, which was boring to watch play out by the end of the novel. The series included plot points which I can only describe as insulting, and here are 3 examples of what I mean. For starters, when Mia began searching for information about a dead god, she seemed surprised to find that the city known as God's Grave was literally named for a fallen god. Mind you, she already knew that some giant being's spine and ribs were used as foundation for walkways and apartments, and that different parts of the city were named for the sword and shield arms. If Mia hadn't played the moment like it was a revelation, I wouldn't have cared. Except she goes out of her way to exclaim that God's Grave is a god's grave? That moment could have improved if she said something like, I already know this, so why are you telling me? I would have thought much better about her and the heavy-handed plot being told in that second instance. Secondly, anytime a character said or thought, I love you, they were going to die. Ashlyn survived much longer than I thought she would, given how she told Mia she loved her and Mia said the same back, though her fate was sealed. Much like Ashlyn's return to life was obvious based on the deceptive language of the prologues. Even the circumstances of Ashlyn's death were disappointing. One trained assassin should never trust or raid the alcohol of another trained assassin, and that's all I'm going to say about that plot contrivance. A similar moment happened in the third novel when Mia told her friends that they wouldn't die. That was the same as signing a death warrant for everyone involved. With the exception of fan favorites, when Mia promised everyone they wouldn't die, I instantly assumed everyone was going to die. Even the thespian who got back in the game to do one final job. Okay, I'm being a bit snotty on that last one, but a lot of the characters were written to be red shirts. Lastly, and I've mentioned this before, but I'm going to discuss how terrible of an idea it was to include Dark Dawn within Dark Dawn. This was the single worst plot contrivance I have ever read, and made me retroactively dislike the first novel. In order for the librarian to have created the fake Dark Dawn, he would have needed to copy Mirukiro's handwriting perfectly. Otherwise, it would have been apparent that the fake Dark Dawn was nothing more than a decoy. For the librarian to write a full novel and make it believable within the amount of time that he had, it doesn't make sense. Furthermore, a part of Mia's assassin training was to be able to distinguish real information from forgeries. The world's most talented assassins pored over the fake Dark Dawn. That they weren't able to identify anything suspicious or anomalous within its pages shatters what I'm willing to believe. This will be a slight tangent about the fake Dark Dawn and the subsequent battle, so here we go. Reading the fake Dark Dawn felt like it was a waste meant only to allow the author a chance to include climactic moments with each of the people responsible for creating Mia the Assassin. Except that was a fake novel, and what actually quote-unquote really happens was much more mundane. Because the scenes played out differently when Mia attacked the Church of Assassins, she never got her comeuppance, and large portions of her arc were left unfulfilled. Some readers may feel that emotional resolution because we, the readers, read those fake chapters in Dark Dawn, and yet Mia the character never experienced them. Once the assassins read the fake Dark Dawn, their counter to the moves that were included in those pages made no sense. They surrounded the wagons Mia was supposed to be in and fell for the obvious trap. The assassin's strategy placed them in a way to be taken out far too easily. It was comparatively like they were walking single file at an armed assailant. There was no backup plan, and the assassin's attack against Mia had more flaws than I would expect from a plan created by the best assassins in the world. Also, Mia had no idea about the fake Dark Dawn novel, so there was no in-story justification for her plan to change from sneaking into the mountain to blowing up those waiting for her. Once the fighting broke out, the assassin should have easily killed all of Mia's friends. We have witnessed how the assassins are experts at close-range combat, whereas the gladiator fighters are more about spectacle and flashy moves. In the narrow, dark hallways of the assassin's stronghold, the advantage should have swung wildly in the assassin's favor. And the fact that Skeva, a politician, was the only one capable of killing any of Mia's friends was too much of an ask, even if he is a shadow magic user. Mia and her people were outnumbered, and most of them had never been in the Church of Assassins stronghold, where the assassins would have a massive home field advantage. This entire invasion scene should have been rewritten to be more believable. My advice for you writers is to not write scenes solely for the purpose of moving plots from A to B or from K to M or whatever. Above all else, don't write scenes that make it seem like you're bored or trying to move things along. Here are some of my lingering questions that made me feel like the Nevernight Chronicles were half-baked. Number 1. How did Sceva survive being darkened, that being the name for those able to use shadow magic? Darkened were shown to be visibly sick or weakened in the presence of religious icons, and yet Sceva was shown in the presence of those religious icons, and yet later on he was proven to be a Darken. Sceva did show us that he built up some immunity to religious icons, and yet that was a single icon, whereas he was shown to be inside of a full-on religious building surrounded by religious icons that Mia couldn't enter because she was darkened. Now, unless Sceva's body double was present at all appearances and was actually the one ruling the nation, this doesn't make sense. Number 2. How was the third novel written? Mia never told her side of the story to Mercurio, the in-canon author of the Nevernight Chronicles, and there was never an impossible edition of that novel before the library that never was burned down. At least with the Nevernight and Godsgrave novels, Mercurio was able to read them, so in theory he could record them later on from memory. For that matter, how were certain points of view included within Dark Dawn? Hush, Butcher, and several others would have been impossible to obtain, let alone know about. And there were several other chapters within Nevernight and Godsgrave that Mercurio explicitly stated he never read before those novels were destroyed. Sure, he could have taken creative liberties when transcribing the first or second novel, but what would be the point of doing that? Some of these inconsistencies can be explained away, though doing so lowers the stakes of the story. If Sceva's magic is a plot contrivance, then it demeans him as a villain. If parts of the novels were made up by Mercurio, then it becomes nothing more than a bedtime story when anything can happen. If parts of these novels are made up in canon by Mercurio, then including them was only meant to drive reader interest. This conflicts with Mercurio's stated purpose within the prologue, that being to tell the truth as it happened and allow us, the reader, to distinguish that from the rumors we may have heard. These issues made the novels worse by adding them in because they were included only to drive in fake tension and stakes. Yes, I understand that these stories are fantasies, but I like some sense of realism and especially consistency in the stories that I read. Otherwise, anything can happen to any character at any time, and stakes are meaningless. My last question is, why did Mia need to become a pirate queen? I glossed over this entire pirate section in my semi-spoiler-free review of the third novel, but all of the chapters involving pirates were irrelevant to the plot. They certainly added to the page count and were a place where the characters could go, but the chapters themselves and the contents within and the interactions were not plot relevant. Plus, Mia became the pirate queen in a chapter or two, thus demeaning that rank at all. Those pirate chapters were speed bumps on the way to the story's conclusion, slowing down the pace to include arbitrary scenes, such as the pirate king who wore a cloak made of human faces. That was cool to include, but was ultimately pointless. Expanding on that idea, Mia excelled at almost everything across the series except when the plot said she couldn't. In less than 2 years, she became the Assassin Queen, the Gladiator Champion, and the Pirate Queen. The speed at which she was able to achieve all those world-renowned titles demeans them. My last thoughts about this series have to do with its finale. The showdown between Mia and Sceva was hinted at since the first novel. They both wield different halves of the dead god's power, raising some of the only stakes across the series. Except the action itself was anything but personal. We watched from the points of view of people fleeing the crumbling city, yet told in this way makes the action feel impersonal, and thus I cared a lot less. We see from afar as buildings collapse and what amounts to two forces of nature blowing against each other. The fleeing citizens were devoid of emotions as their lives and homes were ruined, making me care less for them. Seen from afar, we don't get Mia's hatred for Skeva, or the difficulty in controlling the shadows, or the culmination of her 3-novel struggle. Told from an outside perspective, the defining and foretold moment for 3 novels becomes meaningless words on the page. Not to mention that combined, Mia and Skeva easily killed tens of thousands of innocent people and ruined the lives and displaced double that number. I said this before and I will say it again. Across the series, Mia is the true villain. Except the story doesn't believe that because it gives her a happily ever after moment. In Mia's own words, I'm not some hero in a storybook, which leads to this later monologue. And I don't care what they did to deserve it. They being the man Mia called father and his lover as she describes his public hanging. I don't even care that they weren't perfect. I don't even care that they're just as bad as him being Skeva. Because truth be told, perhaps I'm worse than all of them. So what's right and redemption because Julius Skeva deserves to die. To which Mia's brother replies, then so do you. In my opinion, the Nevernight Chronicles is a great case study in how a unique idea told through expressive language can be put together into a series that doesn't live up to expectations. Entire plot threads could have been removed without much impact to the story. Overall, the novels felt more concerned with spectacle and in a lot of concepts that were more interesting on paper than in what was delivered. The issues that I have with this series would have been fine in a different genre. The plot contrivances I have pointed out and complained about would be perfect for a young adult novel. Except with the graphic nature and content of the Nevernight Chronicles, it skews towards an older and significantly more mature audience, where plot holes and predictable stories and reader handholding is not as acceptable. I am Ben Pick, and thank you for sticking through with Running to Write. I hope I haven't scared you off from the rest of my videos with my harsh criticisms about this critically acclaimed series, but it did not work for me. What do you think of the solutions to my issues with the Nevernight Chronicles? Do they even need to be fixed, or is everything I said wrong and they are great as is? Let me know in those comments. I post my running and writing thoughts on social media, so be sure to follow along and join in with your own comments. Next week, I'll be back to strictly writing advice through writing metaphors. See you next time. Until then, take a breather and read a story you like.